the Iranian small boats. They haven't deployed their small boats yet. We've talked about this before. The boats that they have in these rock caverns under the waterline in Iran. Why haven't they deployed these small boats, these submarines, and so on? It's very interesting. They are holding on to these. Why? Because again, as we have talked about before, they have an escalation ladder. They are working on a theory which is perhaps being revised constantly of what should be the next retaliation.
Delighted to welcome today to the show, July 10th, Vijay Prashad, a founding member of our show, which has taken off really well thanks to all of our global audiences. Transition Protocol. Vijay has been traveling all over the world, so he has on the ground news from all over the world. And I am anxious to hear what he has to say, and I'm delighted to invite him. So, welcome, Vijay, to our show on Friday, the 10th of July. Transition Protocol is the name of the show. And if you have not subscribed, please go ahead and subscribe. If you want to get the security briefing, which we have begun to provide to some of our paid subscribers every week, delivered to your inbox, email. Please become a paid subscriber. We have kept it at the lowest possible cost of $5 because Substack doesn't allow you to go below $5. So visit our Substack page and become a paid subscriber. So welcome, Vijay. Tell us what you see on the ground as events all around us, threaten all the time to get out of hand.
Yeah, I mean, where does one even begin? You and I have been closely looking at, the crosshairs of what's happening in Iran. And, it's a bewildering situation. Look to us that on the auspices of the Pakistani prime minister and the leaders of the military, a deal had been created, a memorandum of understanding signed. Mr. Trump then goes to Turkey. Peculiar set of events there. Accidentally, he talks about the Islamic Republic of Japan. He makes accusations against the Iranians, says that US vessels had been fired upon. The evidence for that is itself murky, just to put it right there at the table. It's not clear what's been going on in the waters of Iran. But that being sufficient for the Trump administration, a casus belli, a cause of war, they returned to striking Iran. And the strikes were pretty catastrophic. People in Iran saying that, this was not just a notional hit, this was a pretty serious, comprehensive attack again, despite the fact that, Trump has now come back to saying, well, there's a ceasefire. What he's not keen on is any further retaliation. I mean, Iran has condemned the U.S. strikes as it would. Iran has said that it would retaliate at its own convenience, and it's warned against further strikes. So in a sense, the Iranians, to my mind, have been extremely careful about how they've spoken back against the United States. I mean, United States bombed railroad bridges. I mean, as I said, this was not a casual hit in the empty spaces of Iran. They hit some strategic railway bridges. They hit the path to Mashhad. This is in the midst of an important religious period. They struck roads that linked north to south. Iran. This was not a just as we say in our part of the world. This was not a faltu strike. This was not a useless strike. This was a real hit. I mean, they really struck Iran, and I want to underscore this. The Iranians, I think, have been pretty straightforward, saying, this is as they said, they used the phrase grave war crimes, but they haven't immediately retaliated. They are waiting, biding their time, and I say biding their time because neither you nor I know exactly what they have in mind. I mean, is this the moment for Iran to say, okay, we won't retaliate, but we can't hold back our friends in Iraq who are at this moment going to strike US bases in northern Iraq? We can't prevent that happening. That's not under our control. by international law, Iran will not be culpable if a group in Iraq with even hands off or some sort of distant connection to Iran decides to go and launch missiles. Or even why missiles? Why did I even say missiles? All you need to do is fire, a shoulder rockets at the U.S. bases in Iraqi Kurdistan, and that would be catastrophic for the United States. So there are ways in which Iran has to retaliate, which are hands off, and as of yet, that has not happened because I think they are also sending a message that that the Iranians want to see a new order developed. They don't want to see chaos. The head of the National Security Council of Iran, Mohammad Bakir Zulkayed, said that if you hit our infrastructure, we'll hit your infrastructure. Well, what infrastructure are they going to hit of the United States? It's certainly not the US territory. I think that we know the Iranians don't have the ability to directly strike US territory, but they can really hit US bases again. And this time I'm suggesting perhaps the target will be Iraq. But why Iraq? Don't forget that Mr. Trump effectively signed the orders for this attack on Iran in Turkey. Why are the US bases in Turkey so feeling so out of this conflict? You don't know. You don't know, and I don't know. There are all kinds of people with frustrations against the United States, hands off from the Iranian leadership that might strike a US base. If you have 900 plus US and allied military bases around the world, you have put yourself in a position of vulnerability. On the one side, it's strength, correct? That the United States has about 900 military bases, US and its allied bases, the joint bases, and so on. Number of them in Germany, in Italy, and in Japan. They're old World War II bases. But, it's a sign of strength that you have all these military bases. Yeah, in northern Nigeria, they probably will build one in Kenya. There's one in the airport in Ghana, and so on. Sign of strength, but also it's a vulnerability. Your fingers are sitting there, the other side of the door. Somebody can come and stamp on them. That's your vulnerability. And Iran doesn't have to order a strike. You see, if people get angry enough, the genocide against the Palestinians, the attacks on Iran, you never know what's going to happen.
In your mind, Vijay, is there a resolution to this just unending conflict? Or, as some of the guests that we have had on this show have said, that it is in the interest of the United States to keep this conflict going on, smoldering, just to weaken Iran, just to make sure that Iran never rises to its potential?
Yeah, I mean, so weaken Iran is a strange statement to make at a time when Iran has outwitted the United States strategically. It's a bit strange because I mean, what does it mean to weaken Iran? It's not like Iran was not capable. For instance, in this case, yeah, it didn't escalate, but it immediately struck Bahrain and Kuwait. Yeah. So, are you saying that that the United States wants to take away Iran's ability for this kind of immediate retaliation? By the way, when I said earlier that Iran was reserving the right to retaliate, what I meant was go beyond the 85 strikes that the US made on Iranian soil. I mean, they did immediately retaliate, but these were reciprocal strikes. They didn't really retaliate. I don't consider the attacks on Bahrain and on Kuwait as a retaliation. I consider those as reciprocal strikes. You slap me, I slap you back. Okay, we shake hands, it's done. But you slap me, I slap you twice. That is what I consider a retaliation. That has not happened. They have not, for instance, in this iteration, gone after Israel. They've been silent with Israel. That's interesting. Hitting a Kuwaiti target of the Americans, which they already basically obliterated before, is not really a major strike by the Iranians. They can do a lot more than that. So, what does it mean to weaken or destroy Iran's strength? I mean, Iran didn't hit the United States with superior strength. It hit the United States with geography and intelligence. It's very difficult to take geography away from Iran. This would be like the United States deciding that the Strait of Hormuz, like the Panama Canal, is now going to be US territory. So the US sort of invades a sliver of land in Oman and a sliver of land in the Iranian soil, barricades it, and says, this is our territory. The Strait of Hormuz is a US territory in the same way as the Panama Canal. I don't think that's going to be possible, frankly. I don't think any US service person wants to put their feet on Iranian soil. I don't think they'll be quite enthusiastic about that. Okay, so one way to weaken Iran is to take away its strategic geography, which is, for all practical purposes, the Strait of Hormuz. That's not possible. How are you going to take away Iranian intelligence, its own capacity to fight a war as if it were a game of chess? Again, I was very much moved by looking at the pieces of the Iranian defensive architecture. You see, they don't have the capacity, as it were. They really don't have the capacity to stop the US attempt to bomb railway lines and so on. It's very difficult for a country like Iran to have the kind of ground to air defensive systems that are going to shut off the ability of the United States to get at Iranian infrastructure. They just don't have that. But they have intelligence, which means they have the ability to think what is going to hurt the Americans and what's going to embarrass them. See, that's the key second point. When you're fighting a war, you're also thinking of the psychology of the person you're fighting. You don't just have to defeat them. That's an archaic, or maybe never really a postulate of warfare. You don't seek necessarily defeat. We are not in the third century BC, where you amass two large armies and you just wallop each other till one sort of survives the slaughter. That's not how wars are fought now. Wars are fought also in terms of the PR. If you're able to demonstrate that I'm still standing, yeah, or if you're able as a smaller country to demonstrate that the wave of attacks haven't destroyed the state is still able to function and so on, that's a prestige win. And so I think that, if the United States wants to destroy or weaken Iranian intelligence, that's going to be very difficult. They have played this entire scenario very, very cleverly. I'll give you the example that has been with me from the beginning of this. From the very beginning, I wondered, where are the Iranian small boats? They haven't deployed their small boats yet. We've talked about this before. The boats that they have in these rock caverns under the waterline in Iran. Why haven't they deployed these small boats, these submarines, and so on? It's very interesting. They are holding on to these. Why? Because, again, as we have talked about before, they have an escalation ladder. They are working on a theory which is perhaps being revised constantly of what should be the next retaliation. If you can retaliate by hitting Kuwait data, the radar sites and so on, continue to pummel those. Don't bother bringing out your next range of arsenal. Keep those in check for another moment. So the United States can only, try to destroy Iran's geographical advantage and its intelligence advantage. And thus far, of course, as you can understand, is you can keep bombing bridges and so on, railway bridges, road bridges, and whatnot, but you can't somehow take away their geographical advantage. You can't take away their intelligence. They've really thought this thing through. I mean, I think, you can kill as many leaders as you want. It seems like they've built the capacity, to withstand multiple layers of effectively murder and come out standing. And that's pretty impressive. So, yeah, I look at this and I think, I don't get how the US actually thinks it's going to be able to weaken Iran, if weakening means taking away its two advantages of geography and strategic thinking.
I totally second that, and multiple guests on our channel have said exactly that, and history is bearing us out as the developments take place. In fact, yesterday on our channel, we had Pepe Escobar and Larry, and we discussed uh, some privileged information that I was able to share with them, that the Supreme Leader's office is considering, seriously considering, and they have announced this even before, that maybe the next step for them would be to declare they're no longer part of the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty. So they have still many cards in their hand. And the information that I have as of this morning, my time, I'm in California, nighttime in Islamabad, is that serious attempts have been made now by the United States to come back to the table. I mean, we reported that yesterday as well. And you have been traveling all over the world. You have been speaking to the right people. Uh, what do you make of all that?
Yeah, I mean, look, frankly, Iran doesn't need to withdraw from the NPT. I mean, Iran has played the international, its international treaties and obligations extremely carefully. Okay, I would, in fact, if I was to advise them, I would say don't withdraw from the NPT. You don't get anything from it. What's the gain? There's no strategic gain in withdrawing from the NPT. The NPT is not a restriction on Iran. Iran is not interested in making a nuclear weapon. So why would you withdraw from the NPT? Iran is not interested in making a nuclear weapon. So why would you go ahead and say we're going to test nuclear weapons, or we're going to bring material from North Korea or wherever? Why would you bother with that? You stay on principle. I think it's really assisted Iran greatly. Look, 2 million people came out to commemorate and commemorate the murder of the Grand Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. 2 million people came to celebrate his life. That was extraordinary. An enormous celebration in Tehran, in Qom, in other cities. I don't think any Western leader is going to see a funeral with even 10% of 2 million. Okay, and most of Western leaders don't know what 10% of 2 million is, because they were sleeping during maths class, whereas the Iranian leadership was wide awake, because many of them are physicists and so on. But the
Yes,
point is that the Iranians have thought this through very well, and I would say to them, look, the only reason to leave the NPT is to send a message to the world saying, well, we are going to go now for a nuclear weapon. Why would you do that when you have an immense moral advantage over the United States? You have said repeatedly, even in the MOU, we are not interested in nuclear weapons. We are ready to negotiate this. So why would you take away that moral advantage? You don't gain anything unless you're actually going to test a nuclear bomb tomorrow. So if you're going to test a nuclear bomb tomorrow, I would say to the Iranians, test it. Withdraw from the NPT afterwards. There's no need to withdraw beforehand. Why would you show your cards? You continue the moral pursuit of saying we are being attacked for no reason at all. And you've demonstrated, you have demonstrated that the US government can send $100 million jet, okay, basically powered by a highly expensive pilot. You're retaliating with drones, which cost nothing. These are suicide drones. These are unmanned vehicles of various kinds. I mean, it's crazy. Even the ballistic missiles the Iranians have been firing at the naval base in Bahrain and the air base in Kuwait. These are cheap missiles. They are not expensive. They are not 100 million US dollars each. So you are able still to fight them off with conventional weapons. If you want to build a nuclear umbrella, I say build the umbrella before you announce it. I mean, in that, I would say to the Iranians, take a lesson from the Indians and Pakistanis. Yeah, their nuclear tests were done in secret. India never entered the NPT. Pakistan never entered the NPT. They just conducted their nuclear tests and they said to hell with you. Yeah, and stupidly, India Pakistan did nuclear tests against each other, which is ridiculous, because we should, as we've talked about before, be talking. India and Pakistan need to
yes.
be talking to each other, not building a massive nuclear arsenal. I doubt, frankly, I doubt that Iran is interested in a nuclear shield. If they were interested in it, they would have built it years ago. when it was actually something that could have benefited them. After the destruction of Libya in 2011, I'm sure in the inner cabinets of the Iranian high officials, I don't know for sure, I have not really been able to hear this from anybody, but I'm sure in the most secret discussions, the highest leadership in Iran said, look at what they did to Libya, look at North Korea, maybe we should go for a nuclear weapon. And others said, including Grand Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who at many occasions came out publicly and said, we don't want weapons of mass destruction. It goes against our understanding of humanity. It goes against the teachings of Islam and so on. I mean, he said this on numerous occasions. So I very much doubt that they will leave the NPT. I would advise them not to leave the NPT. I would say, listen, if you fellows are really interested in nuclear shield, do what the North Koreans did, surprise everybody with a test, and then the war is going to end. If you want to go that road. I don't think they want to go that road. Their road is a much more risky road in a way, because then they're going to continue to have this kind of attack on their territory. It's a much more risky road, but they're trying to establish, in a way, a new security architecture in West Asia, which might end up being more durable than the security architecture in the northeast of Asia. In the northeast of Asia, Japan, South Korea, and so on continue to want to see North Korea, withdraw its nuclear shield and effectively surrender. They continue to want that. But in West Asia, I think the Gulf Arab states, having taken a serious beating on several occasions now, are coming to the understanding that the Saudis had come to earlier, which is, what? We've got to make up with Iran. If we're going to have development, we've got to have a new strategic landscape. It can't include the United States. So I have a feeling the Iranians are pursuing a different road than the North Koreans. They are pursuing a road where they feel that they have already got the advantage. And if they wait out the United States will realize that there's really very little that they can do to suffocate Iran's ambitions. And they are not going to forever get the Gulf Arab states on side. Unlike the Europeans, I think the countries in the proximity to the Gulf Arab states, that includes Saudi Arabia, of course, Iraq, and I'm sure to some extent Syria, these countries are of the view, I'm almost 100% sure, they are of the absolute opposite view of the Europeans, who think that, in fact, Russia can be defeated in Ukraine. I don't think the Gulf Arab states are under the illusion that Iran can be crushed militarily. I think they understand that if Iran is going to get crushed, they are going to get crushed. I mean, put it this way, and I'll end with this. If you take Qatar, Qatar many, many years ago was merely an exporter of raw energy, in other words, petroleum and and natural gas. But Qatar has industrialized in the last several decades. Qatar now has the industrial capacity to produce fertilizer, which it exports with great value added inside its commodity and so on. It's a major exporter of finished industrial goods. The Iranians haven't bombed Qatari's industrial sector yet. They could take it out. Then Qatar is back to, I don't know, exporting dates and camel milk and what else? I have no idea. So I think the Gulf Arab states are very clear that if Iran is going to be turned to rubble, so are they. And that's a risk they are not willing to take. They have realized this much faster than the Germans and the Poles and others, who still ridiculously, that Russia can be defeated in the battlefields of Ukraine and that they'll be safe. They don't understand that if they push Russia far enough, you can say goodbye to Warsaw and Berlin.
Excellent analysis, Vijay. I completely and totally support that. And everybody who has been our regular guest on this show supports exactly everything that you have just said. And for that reason, we were surprised to see that the United States somehow got a Saudi ship and a Qatari ship to violate the rules set out by Iran, and to route to go to break the Strait of Hormuz regime by going through the money sector of the strait. And it appears right now that that is becoming coming to an end. That conflict is coming to an end. As far as I know, as of this morning, my time, nighttime in Islamabad, United States was making a very serious effort to restart their negotiations, and I am informed that that is going to happen in this coming week. Uh, if that comes about, and they are back at the table, even though Trump is making all kinds of ridiculous noise, which he doesn't even understand what he's talking about. What do you think is the end end game here? I mean, do you see Pakistan playing another significant role in bringing these two parties together, as was the case before all this happened? I mean, the talks were supposed to have started on the 11th, that is tomorrow, and everything was in place to accomplish that. And then this escalation took place, and it appears that is dying down right now, as we had all anticipated that was going to happen. So long term, what do you think is where do you think this piece of real estate is headed?
Well, firstly, I mean, I think Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, he didn't go to the funeral of Ali Khamenei, but Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Ishaq Dar was there. So was the Chief of Army Staff and so on. So very
Yes.
high level people went to the funeral in Mashhad. But in the aftermath of the funeral, Prime Minister Sharif had a long telephone call with Masoud Peshkekian and spoke to the Iranian premier about the necessity of, as he said, uh, holding fast to the hard-won gains of peace. Hard-won gains of peace, meaning, the walk that he had to make, Prime Minister Sharif back and forth. It's like a nikah. You're going between one room and the other. It's like a Muslim wedding. With Mr.
Yes.
Sharif carrying the nikah nama back and forth, going,
Yes.
do you
Yes. Yes.
accept
Yes.
this? Kabul hai, kabul hai, kabul hai, kabul hai. And
Excellent
eventually,
analysis.
yeah,
Yes.
eventually, yes, yes, we accept, and the marriage is done. Well, what happens if early into the marriage the two party returns and says, wait a minute, we want to renegotiate our treaty, our agreement? Well, sorry, the agreement is pretty good, because we don't see, the world doesn't see the violation that Mr. Trump saw. In a way, what I would say, and I'm saying this cautiously, in a way I would say that Mr. Trump made this move at the NATO summit because he tied the NATO members' hands right there. There could be no other debate and discussion. He basically took over the summit by showing up there, starting this thing, and then putting this in Erdogan's lap. And I want to once again say that we need a better understanding of the role Mr. Erdogan is playing in all this. Because, Mr. Erdogan has a very strange political dance. He, on the one side, continues to court Turkey's role within so-called Europe. So-called because Europe keeps rejecting Turkey. They don't afford Turkey membership, and so. But Turkey has membership in NATO. This was quite substantial. That there was the NATO summit in Turkey and so on. He courts the Europeans and the United States at the same time. He plays this game with the rest of Asia. That Turkey, of course, it straddles Europe and Asia. Yeah, most of Turkey is in Asia, but Mr. Erdogan really does the straddling over time. On the one minute he's an Asian leader, he's out there, with the Pakistan, with the Central Asians, with the Iranians, and so on. The next minute he's there with Trump and so on, hobnobbing. And I think somebody needs to ask the question of him. Mr. Erdogan, do you actually see yourself as a facilitator of NATO? Are you pretty pleased with the way NATO operates and acts? I mean, NATO, although not part of this conflict against Iran, NATO has basically endorsed it. I mean, there is not a NATO member that has come out and said this is a ludicrous thing. Perhaps some sniffles here and there round the corner from Pedro Sanchez of Spain, who has been making some noises about the genocide against the Palestinians, and also maybe a little bit here and there about the excesses against the Iranians, but there's no real break in the consensus. And the new British Prime Minister who's going to come in, he's been anointed from above, Andy Burnham. He made again some comments about the genocide of the Palestinians, very tepid comments, but they don't break ranks when it comes to the US actual wars, as in the case of Iran. I don't see Andy Burnham saying this is a big waste of money. They are not breaking ranks on any of these things. So Erdogan, I think, has played a very poor role here. One would have expected that he could have, in the midst of the NATO summit, said that this is dragging NATO into a conflict we don't need. Iran doesn't need a conflict with its neighbor, and sorry, Turkey doesn't need a conflict with its neighbor, and Turkey and Iran are neighbors. That they don't need this conflict. They need, again, more collaboration. And I'm actually wondering, and I've wondered about this from the first day that the quote unquote MOU was violated, whether this was a pretty deliberate act by Trump to do it during the NATO summit in Turkey, to embarrass everybody and draw them further into allegiance to the United States.
Uh, Vijay, from the reporting that I have, Mr. Erdogan has been extremely active on the phone with Pakistani leadership, Shahbaz Sharif. And as everybody knows, especially yourself, Pakistan is run not by Shahbaz Sharif, but by the Field Marshal, with him as well. And also are reporting that Mr. Field Marshal has been in direct communication with his counterparts in Iran, and has become very active to again put these talks back together, these parties back together. And the timeline that I have been given is in this coming week, by Wednesday and Thursday, that they'll be back together. My question to you, Vijay, with your vast understanding of the region, and being from the region like myself, do you see what I suspect, that this is the end game for Trump, for the United States, for the Europeans, and that at the end of all this, Iran is going to be in its rightful place as a dominant player in
Well, I
that
mean,
region?
yeah, frankly speaking, Iran was the most important country in early modern times in that region. I mean, in the 17th century, the Safavid Empire was had its anointed place as the central military and political and cultural power in the region. And if not for Nadir Shah's untoward invasion of India and theft of the peacock throne and so on, we may have actually not had such an uncharitable view of Iran when we studied history, because all our history books emphasized his invasion, which was basically an unnecessary freebooter invasion into India, unnecessary completely. But we grew up, all of us, with a sense of Iran's role in our region as an important cultural, political, and military actor. A very important role that it played. I mean, your and my languages benefit from the greatness of Iranian vocabulary, of Iranian grammatical structures, and so on. And that actually goes into the Arab world as well. It's not just eastward, it's also westward. Iran plays a very important role. The debates and discussions around Islam within Iran have a role outside Iran, outside Farsi, into Arabic, into our languages, all the way to Indonesia. So we need to understand that Iran was suppressed from the 1920s. The moment oil was discovered, the West began to suppress Iran. When Iran tried to stand up in 1953 under Mohammad Mossadegh, He was overthrown in a coup when Iran then tried to stand up with the Iranian Revolution of 1978, which becomes Islamic regime in 1979. From then onwards, the West has tried to overthrow it, first by urging Saddam Hussein to invade in 1980 and so on. So, Iran has had a historic role in the same way that China has had a historic role. But Iran has been suppressed basically because of the discovery of oil. That's the key thing. The West has sought to suppress Iran from the entirety of the 20th century because of the discovery of oil. That was the reason. And it's a little bit of that continuing today, the vast oil wealth that Iran has, but also the United States no longer wants to see Iran rise because there are some ideological differences. The United States would like countries like Iran to basically be subordinate to the United States. That's an ideological difference. That has nothing to do with oil. They would just like to see Iranian obeisance, and Iran is refusing to bow down. That's a problem for the US. Iran is providing an alternative to people that you can actually stand up for your sovereignty. Again, whatever you think of the government in Iran, and I must say, traveling to different countries, you meet people and you say, well, what do you think about Iran? And everybody, regardless of political affiliation, religious background, they say it is amazing how Iran is standing up to the United States. That's a political position that Iran has taken to stand up to bullying from foreign powers, and that's impressive. And it's that the United States now needs to suffocate, because this can get extremely contagious. So yeah, I mean, if the United States accepts the position that Iran will not be defeated, the Iranian government that's there, the Islamic regime and so on, will not be overthrown. If that is now accepted by Washington, you have a major problem for US power, because not only has an older civilization come onto the scene saying, listen, we have ties and links across the region that are important, and we want to renew those, and we want to do it from a position of dignity, not from a position of subordination. We don't need to build an axis of resistance. In other words, we can now build a unity for development. It's a completely different foundation. Iran need not now export to Hezbollah missiles and so on, but why not Iran export its ability to build bridges in Lebanon and build schools and so on? It provides a different model. That's a genuine threat to
Your
the United
internet.
States. So what I would say is that if
Uh,
Iran, yeah.
your internet froze for a second. That's
Okay.
okay.
Sorry.
No,
No,
no, no
I
problem.
was
You're
just
back now.
making the point, closing up the point that if Iran is allowed
Uh,
to stand on its feet, as it were, it would
something wrong with your
provide
internet,
people
Vijay.
of the region an alternative
Hello.
ground from which to imagine development and so on, and that's unacceptable to the United States. That what is unacceptable in the independence of Iran is not actually some military issue or some religious cultural issue, but it's also that Iran might provide, rather than an axis of resistance, it might provide a community of development. It might provide an alternative. Iran is a very important partner in China's Belt and Road Initiative. These are the kinds of developments, a collaboration on projects the United States doesn't want to see. It would prefer to see these countries subordinated to Western power than to see them standing up on their own feet. And I think that's really, what the West fears much more than Iran having a nuclear bomb and so on. The nuclear bomb is the shield that would protect Iran to do its own agenda. I don't think the Iranians have any, necessity to use a bomb like that on anybody. And we know very well it's not even on their agenda. So this issue is not about the nuclear bomb. It's all about Iran exercising its independence. In other words, the coup of 1953 against Mohammad Mossadegh has never been forgiven. It's never been. The United States wants to repeat the coup of 53. They will never forgive Iran, in a way, for Mossadegh on the one side, independent president of Iran, 1951 to 1953. They won't forgive Iran for Mohammad Mossadegh, and they will never forgive Iran for the Iranian Revolution of 1978-79. This is punishment for that. It has nothing to do with nuclear policy.
But Vijay, don't you agree with me and my position and the position of other founding members of our channel that that will of the United States cannot be imposed on Iran today? Maybe it was imposed over the last 40 years, 50 years, but the time has come for Iran to have thrown that out, and this will be a decisive moment.
Well,
What
it's actually more than a decisive moment. I mean, I think that historian 50 years from now, let alone 100 years from now, will look back at this particular engagement and will come out saying that this was the moment when we got to see the futility of the exercise of US military power. That US military power, however strong it is in its destructive capacity, has become strategically less useful. Its strategic capacity has declined dramatically. What can the United States strategically, attain in its pummeling of Iran? Very little. It's not able to overthrow the state, to destroy the state. The state continues to stand. It destroyed the state in Libya, a much weaker state, than the state in Iran, but it did destroy the state in Libya. It's not able to do that in Iran. It has not been able to terrify the Iranian government into a surrender and so on. So, in that sense, a historian 50 years from now, 100 years from now, will say, well, those fellows at transition protocol, well, they had a point when they said that this was a decisive moment, and the decisive moment has to be very precisely understood. It's not a decisive moment where Iran inflicted a military defeat on the United States. That's not what happened. That is not what is happening. Iran has not defeated the United States militarily. Iran has defeated the United States strategically. It has demonstrated that the ferocity of US military power is not sufficient to attain strategic goals, that Iran is able to drive a strategic agenda despite the US ferocity. The United States bombs railroad bridges, bombs, auto bridges, bombs power plants, and so on. But the Iranians wait. They don't do anything comparable. They haven't destroyed civilian infrastructure in large part of the Gulf Arab states. They gone precise. They went for the US military bases in both Bahrain and Kuwait. It's a precise strike on military targets. They didn't hit civilian targets. That's interesting. Maintains the high moral ground. Very interesting and important for strategic war. Secondly, it demonstrates to the US that its military infrastructure can be hit hard, and it's done it. It's demonstrated it. It's destroyed radar facilities and so on. It's made it difficult for the US to be ferocious in its attack on Iran. So, again, we have to be precise. It's true. The Iranians have in this conflict demonstrated that the United States is not able to attain strategic goals using its ferocious military force. It's not a military defeat inflicted on the United States, it's a strategic defeat. And by the way, strategic defeats are much more enduring than military defeats. Military defeat, you can always rebuild your military. You can go back home. The United States is far away. Iran can't hit the US. You build a whole bunch of new kinds of crazy weapons, come back and you bomb them again. That's possible. But a strategic defeat is much more enduring. What will the US come back and do the next time? Will they bomb the bridges again? But then Iran will come back and close the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to have your oil tankers have two double hulls? A double hulled oil tanker, oil prices will continue to be high. Oil tankers are single hulled. The reason they are single hulled is then they are lighter and it's cheaper to transport oil long distances. If you have a single hulled oil tanker and you get hit by an unmanned drone, and it even creates a crack in the hull, that's a serious problem for you. In fact, I would hit the oil tanker above the waterline as a message to the oil tanker that look what we can do. Our drones struck you above the waterline and created a crack in the hull. If we come at you below the waterline, you're leaking into the strait, and that's a serious issue. Everybody's going to be angry about that. You can't afford that. So, I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to double hull your tankers? You're going to make the price of oil go 5 6 times as high? I don't think that's possible. So the strategic victory is enduring. A military victory can be reversed.
Absolutely, absolutely on point, Vijay. Absolutely on point. Final question, Vijay, before I let you go. Don't you think this lesson was learned by the United States in Vietnam? I mean, what did they achieve in Vietnam? Same strategy, same defeat.
Yeah, I mean, forget Vietnam. You're raising Vietnam. Let's go to much closer. Two examples, one neighboring, one both neighboring. Let's take the examples of first Iraq. United States
Yes,
comes into illegal war Iraq 2003, shock and awe, bombs Baghdad, destroys the power grids, destroys basically everything. Yeah, comes in, occupies the country, creates the green zone, has its own viceroy sitting there in Baghdad. Then what? Then it constitutes an Iraqi government because you're under pressure to do that. And then the Iraqi government says, we refuse to give your troops immunity. So the US has to hang its head down and retreat from Iraq. What was the victory in Iraq? Then the Iraqi government basically becomes totally pro Iranian. Big victory for Iran strategically, nothing for the United States. On the other side of Iran's border, United States goes in after 2001, starts bombing all over the place in Afghanistan, kills a lot of Afghans. We still don't have an accurate count. Destroys not cities but villages more than cities, although Kabul is really a militarized city. Puts in basically a fraud government. First, Hamid Karzai is sitting there for so many years. Then Hamid Karzai becomes a big critic of US power. Yeah, then you put
yes,
a
yes.
second fellow who is basically a World Bank cutout. He sits there. He's basically useless. And then the Taliban comes back, and the US has to withdraw. So where are the gains? The gains are not there. One of the things about the term hubris is the act of not learning. That's the act of not learning. But it's not just hubris, Zulfikar. That's the important thing. The United States is stuck for options. It is stuck because it can't get its elites to invest in the country. The major greenfield investments have come in AI data centers. That's not enough. They are not building things in the US. Maybe armaments. That's about it. Some high tech goods, but they're not manufacturing. The share of manufacturing has declined precipitously. In the UK, where I'm talking to you from right now, manufacturing is about 8% of GDP. That's extremely low. Andy Burnham coming in as he's not going to be able to lift it to even 9%. I very much doubt it. So they have a problem. They are trying to use military force to bludgeon all these countries into submission. It's not working. And even though they are going to keep failing, they will keep doing this. They are building up again against China. What are they crazy? They're going to have a war against China. Have they lost their minds? Well, they have lost their minds. They're desperate to hold on to their power. They don't want to live in a democratic world of equals. They want to be the only ones who dictate the terms of human life. And sorry, that day is gone. We live in a different world. They are not willing to come to terms with it, but the world has already changed.
Vijay, I could not have said that better. This is why you are a founding member of this extraordinary channel, which has done actually very well. Thank you. Thanks to our global audiences who have supported us. I will ask for your support again. Kindly subscribe, hit the like button, and if you want security briefs delivered to you that provide you information that is not yet public, maybe a week, maybe more than a week before anybody knows about it, delivered directly to your mailbox. Please become a paid subscriber. Go to Substack and become a paid subscriber so that you can get more of the extraordinary analysis that my friend Vijay just provided that you will not get from anyplace else. Thank you very much, Vijay. I look forward to seeing you again and enjoy your time in England. You just told me before we got on the air that this is a part of a home for you. So perhaps, a respite from all the traveling that you've been doing.
Yes, at least 24 hours of respite, but I'll take it. Thanks a lot, Zulfikar. See you next week.
Thank you, Vijay. Thank you so much. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Bye.